Number 1. The Port Bow Mystery. On September 3rd, 1990, a 19-year-old girl named Evi Rauter left her sister's apartment in Florence. She left a note saying she was visiting the nearby town of Siena for the day. But Evi never made it to Siena. Instead, less than 24 hours later, her body was discovered over 600 miles away in Port Bow, a small town on the border of Spain and France. The scene was incredibly disturbing. Evi was found hanging from a pine tree on a steep hill overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. She was barefoot, wearing blue dungarees, and all of her identification, money, and rail passes were missing. Local authorities initially ruled her death a suicide, but investigators and her family knew the official timeline made absolutely no sense. How did a teenager with no vehicle travel across the borders of Italy, France, and Spain in a single afternoon? According to the Spanish Civil Guard's investigative files, taking the train would have required multiple complex transfers, yet no witnesses remembered seeing her. Even stranger, the knots used to secure the rope were tied with a professional nautical precision. Evi had zero sailing experience. The mystery only deepened as time went on. Because her ID was stolen, Spanish police didn't know who she was. According to European missing persons records, she was known for 32 years only as the unnamed girl of Port Bow. It wasn't until a true crime television program aired in 2022 that her sister finally recognized her clothing. But while Evi finally got her name back, the truth of her final day remains a complete mystery. Did Evi meet someone in Florence who promised her a ride to Spain, only to murder her and stage a suicide? Or was she fleeing some unseen threat that forced her to cross 3 countries in a matter of hours? To this day, the Spanish police have no suspects, no murder weapon, and no logical explanation for how a girl from a quiet Italian town ended up hanging from a tree on a foreign border. Number 2. The Magdalena Zook Incident. In April 2017, a 27-year-old Polish woman named Magdalena Zook booked a surprise vacation to a resort in Marsa Alam, Egypt. But at the last minute, her boyfriend realized his passport was expiring and couldn't fly. Rather than waste the tickets, Magdalena traveled to the Egyptian resort alone. It was a decision that would lead to one of the most disturbing and highly debated mysteries in recent European history. Almost immediately upon arriving in Egypt, Magdalena's behavior changed drastically. According to hotel staff and her family, the previously healthy young woman became intensely paranoid, terrified, and disoriented. She refused to leave her room and was found lying apathetic on the floor. Realizing something was deeply wrong, her boyfriend in Poland arranged for a local tour guide to take her to a nearby hospital in Port Galib so she could get medical clearance to fly home early. It was during this time that a deeply unsettling video call took place between Magdalena and her boyfriend. In the recorded footage, which later leaked online, Magdalena is seen sobbing uncontrollably, glancing around the room in absolute terror. When her boyfriend begs her to explain what is happening, she refuses to speak clearly, crying that she is in grave danger and that the people around her are playing tricks on her. She repeatedly begs him to just get her out of there. When Magdalena finally arrived at the Egyptian hospital, her panic escalated into sheer survival mode. Bizarre CCTV footage captured inside the corridor shows her violently fighting against several men, including hospital staff and local guides. She kicks, screams, and physically battles them as she tries to sprint toward the exit. The men eventually overpower her, physically dragging her back into a hospital room where she was chemically sedated and restrained to a bed. What happened next ultimately ended her life. Despite being tied down and under medical observation, Magdalena somehow managed to break free from her restraints. On April 30th, in a state of absolute panic, she threw herself from the second-story window of the hospital. She survived the initial fall, but suffered massive internal trauma. She died hours later after being transported to a larger, better-equipped medical facility in the nearby city of Hurghada. Egyptian authorities immediately ruled her death a tragic suicide resulting from a sudden psychotic break. But her family and the Polish public refused to accept that answer. Polish prosecutors launched their own investigation, openly pursuing theories of murder, forced drugging, and human trafficking. They questioned whether the erratic behavior was truly a mental breakdown or if she was given a synthetic drug like flaca or scopolamine to make her compliant. The public pointed to the presence of unidentified local men in the CCTV footage and the sheer, unadulterated terror in her final video call as proof of foul play. Did a perfectly healthy 27-year-old suffer a spontaneous, fatal mental collapse in a foreign country? Or was she desperately trying to escape a very real, coordinated human threat? To this day, the true cause of Magdalena Zook's terrifying final hours remains entirely unexplained. Number 3. The Mario Biondo Incident. In May 2013, a 36-year-old Italian cameraman named Mario Biondo was living in Madrid, Spain. He had recently married a famous Spanish television presenter, and his career was thriving. But on the afternoon of May 30th, his housekeeper entered his apartment and made a horrifying discovery. Mario was dead in the living room, and the Spanish authorities quickly rushed to declare it a straightforward suicide. The scene appeared cut and dry to the initial responders. Mario was found hanging from a lightweight pashmina shawl, which had been tied to a metal bookshelf in the living room. However, when Mario's family in Italy received the official police photographs, they were absolutely horrified. The crime scene defied the basic laws of physics and forensic science, pointing toward a highly sophisticated staged murder. First, Mario's body was not fully suspended. His feet were resting completely flat on the floor, his knees only slightly bent. But even more bizarre was the bookshelf itself. The shelves were packed with delicate ornaments, trinkets, and loose books. When a person dies by hanging, the body undergoes violent, uncontrollable muscle spasms. Yet, not a single feather or fragile item on that shelf had been disturbed. Refusing to accept the suicide ruling, his family fought to have his body exhumed and transported back to Italy. Independent forensic pathologists uncovered deeply disturbing cover-ups in the original Spanish autopsy. The first medical examiner claimed to have opened and analyzed Mario's skull and stomach, but the Italian exhumation proved his skull and stomach had never been touched. The official report was a lie. When the Italian experts conducted a real examination, they found a severe, unexplained contusion on the back of Mario's skull. This strongly suggested he had been struck from behind with a heavy object and knocked completely unconscious. Furthermore, the trauma marks on his neck completely contradicted the official story. A soft, pashmina shawl does not leave deep, uniform, narrow strangulation marks. Forensic analysis showed a deep groove encircling his entire neck, a signature mark left by a thin wire or cable. He had been strangled from behind, and his body was later propped up on the bookshelf to simulate a suicide. As if the physical evidence wasn't enough, independent IT experts analyzed Mario's laptop and discovered a massive coordinated digital cover-up. Hours after Mario's time of death, while his body was still in the apartment, his laptop was remotely accessed. Spyware was activated on the device, and massive amounts of private data were permanently deleted from his hard drive. Whoever killed him was desperately trying to erase what Mario had been researching the night he died. He was targeted, silenced, and wiped clean. In August 2022, an Italian judge finally validated the family's agonizing 9-year battle. The court officially ruled that Mario Biondo's death was an elaborate homicide, and the suicide scene had been deliberately staged. Tragically, due to the passage of time and botched early investigations, the perpetrators could not be identified, leaving a cold-blooded killer walking free. Number 4. The Rebecca Coriam Incident. In March 2011, 24-year-old British crew member Rebecca Coriam vanished from the Disney Wonder cruise ship. She was sailing off the Pacific coast of Mexico when she simply disappeared into the night. It was the first time in the history of Disney Cruise Line that a crew member went missing. But this wasn't a simple case of a tragic accident at sea. It quickly evolved into a massive corporate cover-up. The timeline begins on the morning of March 22nd. At 9 a.m., Rebecca failed to report for her shift. This was highly out of character, so ship security immediately began paging her over the intercom system. When they couldn't locate her, they checked the onboard security cameras. What they found on the CCTV footage was incredibly disturbing. At 5:45 a.m., Rebecca was seen on deck 1, pacing nervously and engaged in a highly emotional phone call. In the footage, she looked deeply distressed. Strangely, she was wearing baggy, oversized men's clothing that clearly did not belong to her. During the call, a male colleague approached her to ask if she was all right. She visibly mouthed, "Yeah, fine," hung up the internal phone, and put her hands to her head in frustration. She then walked out of the camera's frame, heading toward a crew-only area of the ship. She was never seen again. When the ship docked in Los Angeles, Disney claimed she was likely swept overboard by a rogue wave. However, the investigation was handled bizarrely. Because the ship was registered in the Bahamas, a single Bahamian detective was flown out to investigate. According to Rebecca's parents, he spent just one day on board, interviewed only 9 crew members, and questioned absolutely 0 passengers before flying home. The physical evidence completely contradicted Disney's rogue wave theory. A pair of Hawaiian flip-flops was found near the Deck 4 crew pool. Investigators claimed they were Rebecca's and that she had slipped. But her friends and family noted the shoes were the wrong size and style. Furthermore, the walls around that specific deck were incredibly high, making an accidental fall physically impossible without deliberately climbing the safety railing. Crew members whispered about a darker truth. Some claimed Disney had full CCTV coverage of the area where she vanished, but refused to release the tapes to protect the company's family-friendly image. Weeks after she vanished, there was sudden, unexplained activity on her bank accounts, and someone mysteriously changed her Facebook password. To this day, the true fate of Rebecca Coriam remains hidden beneath layers of maritime jurisdiction and corporate silence. Number 5. The Blair Adams Incident. In July 1996, a 31-year-old Canadian man named Blair Adams began exhibiting extreme paranoia. Living in Surrey, British Columbia, Blair suddenly told his mother and friends that someone was trying to kill him, and he desperately needed to leave the country. He didn't explain who was after him, but his terror was entirely genuine. What followed was a frantic cross-border flight that ended in an incredibly baffling tragedy. On July 5th, Blair emptied his bank accounts and safe deposit boxes, taking out his life savings. He packed a fanny pack with thousands of dollars in American, Canadian, and German currency, along with jewelry, platinum, and nearly 5 ounces of solid gold bars. He then attempted to cross the border into Seattle by ferry. However, U.S. border agents flagged him as a possible drug courier due to the massive amount of loose cash and denied him entry. Terrified and desperate, Blair abandoned his car, rented another, and successfully slipped into the United States on his 3rd attempt. From Seattle, he bought a plane ticket to Frankfurt, Germany, but changed his mind. Instead, he flew to Washington, D.C. Upon landing, he immediately rented a Toyota and drove nearly 500 miles southwest, eventually breaking down near Knoxville, Tennessee, a city where he had absolutely no friends or connections. A local tow truck driver picked Blair up at a gas station. Blair insisted his car key had stopped working, but the driver noticed he was using the key from his previous rental car. Thinking Blair was simply confused, the driver dropped him off at a nearby Fairfield Inn. Security cameras captured Blair in the lobby. He paid for a room with a $100 bill, but before he got his change, he abruptly walked outside into the night and vanished. At 7:30 a.m. the next morning, construction workers made a horrific discovery. Blair's body was lying in the parking lot of a nearby half-built hotel. According to the Knox County Sheriff's autopsy report, he had been brutally beaten, and his stomach was ruptured from a massive blow. He also had a deep gash on his forehead. A single strand of someone else's hair was gripped tightly in his hand, proving he had fought for his life. Blair was found completely nude from the waist down, his pants and shoes tossed nearby. Yet, the motive was clearly not robbery. Sitting in plain sight around his body was his unzipped fanny pack. The thousands of dollars in international cash, the platinum, and the solid gold bars were completely untouched. Why would a killer brutally murder a vulnerable man but leave behind a literal fortune in untraceable gold and currency? For decades, detectives have been stumped. Did Blair's intense paranoia stem from a genuine threat that followed him all the way from Canada to Tennessee? Or did a severely mentally ill man experience a tragic coincidence, running into a violent stranger in a random parking lot? The DNA from the hair in his hand has never found a match, and the killer remains unidentified. It remains one of the most baffling, unsolved tourist murders in history,